Why, hello. It's Nelson Scott here from Job Pedal, and alongside me, it's an absolute pleasure to have the Grand Wizard of Sector, Duncan. How are you?
G'day, Nelson. How are you going, mate?
I'm very good. It's Saturday. I'm looking forward to having a night of debauchery.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to having a quiet glass of wine and maybe some fish. So there'll be white wine.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Semillon Blanc.
A Sauv Blanc?
Yep.
From France?
Yep. Well, a little Semillon. Yeah. So that's I'm looking forward to that quiet dinner tonight with my wife. So I'm looking forward to that meal. So there'll be fish salad, maybe a bit of turkey spread.
Oh, yeah. And that all sounds very healthy.
And it's Mediterranean. So I'm pleased with that.
You're,
so
man,
we're
you're
salad,
a cultured
yes.
man, aren't you? Now let's get down to business.
Yep.
SLED, changing the new club subclass, my apologies, 1C to a cash in transit security license. What happens to the crowd control, which is 1C?
Well, Nelson, starting from the 1st of June this year, there'll be changes implemented specifically in regards to the 1A licence. And that's applicable to unarmed guards, basically, yeah. Under the new regulations, the 1A licence will also include crowd control.
Right, that's interesting because, with banks increasingly emphasising the promotion of a cashless society, that just seems to be where we're going, there's a potential decline in cash and transit jobs as the reliance on physical cash just continues to diminish. And what is that? The need for transporting and safeguarding cash becomes less prevalent, which could impact the demand for cash in transit services. Something you've noticed?
Yes, Nelson. Look, the rapid shift towards digital banking is conflicting with people in the bush. I'm from the bush, so I can speak on behalf of people out in the bush because they're wanting to keep regional branches of banks open, and that's very important.
And that's been a real issue, hasn't it? They shut down left, right, and centre and keep particularly older people in the lurch.
Yep.
It's ridiculous.
Yep. Well, Nelson, despite the big four banks in Australia recording substantial profits, digital banking being heralded as the future, there's more than 650 bank branches that have closed in regional and rural areas since 2020. And that trend has left a lot of residents searching for alternatives and solutions, and it's bewildering. Banks, I think, have got a responsibility to provide the services to rural customers, and they're not doing that. But as the cash usage decreases, servicing the customers in rural areas becomes more costly, particularly regarding the distribution of CIT companies, mate. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get the sense, Duncan, that what governments really want is that a cashless society at some point. And I guess the challenge for the government is, for a cash-up society, is the issue of tax evasion.
Yes, Nelson, that's true. Also, cash transactions hold significance for organised crime as they enable them to evade government security measures and the scrutiny. If businesses were to cease accepting cash, well, criminals would encounter obstacles requiring them to either declare their cash or find alternatives. A cashless society would render criminal activities less lucrative.
That's very interesting. What would you say are the drawbacks of a cashless society? Because I'm a pragmatist and I like to look at reality, and I see that the future is already beginning to unfold, and the growing prevalence of cashless payment methods suggests, particularly speaking as someone who's from Gen Z, cash might eventually become obsolete.
Yeah, well, as mentioned earlier, banks are actively promoting a cashless society, which allows them to reduce the staff, and they can then increase profitability through digital transactions. And when it comes to transactions in shops, businesses typically are incurring a fee of around 2 to 3% for credit card transactions. The credit card sector is largely controlled by a few dominant players in the market, and most retailers prefer cash anyway, due to no bank fees. What we also find is that the customers have got that freedom and the freedom of having the cash. And cash is important for anyone that's got a poor credit rating. However,
I've got a poor credit rating.
Really? Well, well, there you go. So, don't you find that sometimes you might tap and go, but you've also got that freedom of using cash, which you can check on what you're spending, and I think that's really important. But I'll tell you the biggest issue that we have out there is the payment terminal outages, and they can disrupt electronic transactions.
Yes, and I remember that happened last year. That at some point, one of the banks wasn't working, and then people couldn't access their money because we're so reliant digitally.
Yeah, that was in the Northern Rivers area.
Yeah, well, that was during the floods, I believe, around Lismore, where the terminals and the ATMs were badly damaged.
That's right. Oh yeah, and the residents, they might have money in their account, but they have no way to access it. So a system was set up whereby they were given cash. They had to be. I think their helicopters were flying the cash in for the poor buggers. And in Mullumbimby, I believe at Woolworths, they had cash only signs. And that was evident with social media. It's understood that there was at least 5 of those Woolly stores that are affected by floods, and they completely lost their FTOS services completely.
It's wild. And in Lebanon, I remember towards the end of last year, there was a situation where a large number of depositors, they rushed to banks out of desperation. They resorted to force in demanding the withdrawal of their savings.
Yep. And what were they after? They were after cash.
Yeah, apparently there was a meltdown in Lebanon's economy, right, which is obviously quite scary.
Yeah. Well, for years, Lebanon's banks have faced criticism due to the risky investments, and they're not the only ones facing such challenges. Remember the time that there was 2 banks in the United States. So there was Silicon Valley Bank and the New York Signature Bank, and they experienced significant losses as well, Nelson. And there was a run on deposits leading to their collapse, and they had to be sold off.
And of course, Sam Bankman fraud.
Bankman,
as I like to call him. Anyone who have mental or physical impairments, they're currently able to manage well within the existing systems. However, transition to a cashless society could pose challenges for them because cash provides easier budgeting capabilities, from what I understand, and proves essential during outages or emergencies like floods and bushfires, right, Dunks?
That's right, Nelson. And then you've got the low-income households. They heavily depend on cash and could face exclusion if certain goods and services are inaccessible without cash payment options.
Yeah, and look at the privacy issues. China, I think from what I've been reading, are leading the way with a more cashless society, right?
Yep. Well, it's really scary in China because the Chinese government's ongoing experimentation with a digital currency. They're bringing about their own digital currency, and that aims to grant them access to comprehensive information about individuals, pressure groups, businesses, and organisations. So this grants the government significant control over its citizens, Nelson, and it's certainly raising concerns about a complete loss of privacy. Privacy is so important these days. So you've got the ability to monitor all economic activities. They provide a political dictatorship with increased power to suppress any criticism, and that's happening in China.
And we obviously understand that in China because there's a lot of government overreach, stuff that we wouldn't expect to see in the West. But is it something that could eventually happen here?
Oh, yeah, eventually, yes. Yes, it would, but in different ways, depending on who's in power at the time and which country. Even in Western countries, there are individuals who may have reservations about companies tracking their spending habits and sending personalised marketing messages. So the privacy concerns, Nelson, they relate to electronic money, and they're a significant source of worry for civil rights advocates. So, yeah.
So let's look into the crystal ball here.
Yep.
What is
what
the
do we
future
see? Yep.
for cash? I'm asking you. You're the prophet. You're our Yoda, Duncan.
It's a slide, I think, towards a cashless or mostly cashless society, and that's unlikely to stop. However, it's important, extremely important, not to hastily embrace a cashless society, I think, Nelson. It's driven by motivation, mainly from governments and large corporations, and they're seeking control over us. there's anyone who have been victims of identity theft and they can recount their process of dealing with a challenging mix of credit card companies, debt collectors, credit scoring agencies, and various other entities, it's a huge worry.
Thank you, Duncan. As always, very thought-provoking, and frankly, it's getting me thinking, what lies ahead? What does it mean for ordinary individuals? I mean, they may have reduced control over their spending decisions, including when and where they can use their money.
Yep. That's so true. And thank you very much for giving us this important time. Thank you, Nelson.
You know what I think this calls for? As John Lennon once said, you say you want a revolution. Well, you know. Come on, Duncan. You
love that song. I really do. Yep, I love that song, and you sing it beautifully. Not as good as John Lennon, but
I can do a John Lennon impression. I'm from Liverpool, the Beatles. I first met Paul at a bar, you know, and we sort of doing a Hey Diddly Diddy playing. Paul was much more of a musician than me, though, you know.
Someone give this bloke a guitar. Thanks again,
Duncan.
Nelson.
Cheers.
Thank you.